There is a type of werewolf virus that is transmitted through sexual contact. Anyone who has sexual intercourse with an infected person will become a potential werewolf shifter every full moon night, or when experiencing severe trauma. The werewolf virus will erupt instantly, turning the person into a bloodthirsty monster. Jessica, a bartender, accidentally contracted this virus. She was abducted by an unknown organization. When she woke up, she found herself locked in an iron cage, with restraint straps around her hands that she could hardly break free from. Just then, a nun appeared. She opened the cage for Jessica, and led her through a long corridor into an empty room. A table stood in the center of the room. The nun gestured for Jessica to sit down, and then began to question her like a dean, asking in detail about her basic information, and how many people she had been sexually involved with. Jessica found these questions highly offensive, but she had to answer to avoid angering the nun. The nun held up a photo of an Asian man, and asked if Jessica had been sexually involved with him. The questions were getting more and more absurd. Jessica said she had never seen this man before, but the nun didn't believe her. She even called over a monk, who held down the struggling Jessica, so the nun could step forward and sprinkle holy water on her. At this moment, another priest walked in and said some inexplicable things. In his early years, when he was interning at a church, he had studied under Father Mangucci, an elderly priest in his 80s, who seemed just one step away from being insane. But you can't judge a person by their appearance. Father Mangucci could always see things that ordinary people couldn't. Back then, a girl named Daniela was sent to the church. She was homeless and suffering from a drug addiction. Everyone thought she was a typical lost soul, but only Father Mangucci saw through the real reason. There was a beast hidden inside Daniela. She had contracted that terrifying virus through her relationships with men. Unfortunately, the priest failed to save Daniela back then, but ever since that incident happened, he had been studying diligently, and soon discovered that a sexually transmitted werewolf virus was quietly spreading in the city. The priest told Jessica with great certainty, "You have also contracted this virus. In 3 days, this disease will fully erupt, and I will purify the filth from you then." After saying this, the priest instructed the monk to grab Jessica and drag her to a bathtub. After the nun recited a few prayers, the believers forcefully held Jessica down into the water. Several rounds of water torture left her exhausted, and Jessica admitted to everything the nun said. She just wanted to end the suffering quickly. The nun was satisfied with Jessica's cooperative attitude, and told Brother Marcus to drag her back to the cell first. Next, the nun would conduct an in-depth investigation into everyone who had come into contact with Jessica. To confirm if this was the first case of exposure, Marcus escorted Jessica back to the cell. Along the way, she saw other detained women, like Jessica. They were all trapped in iron cages. Marcus locked the cage and covered it with a cloth. He didn't say a single word to Jessica the entire time, and turned a blind eye to her questions. Jessica felt dazed under the heat of the lamp. In her confused state, she seemed to see another version of herself. The other her had no shirt on, with a clear scratch on her back. In the vision, Jessica was taking a photo of the scratch with her phone. Only then did she remember that her phone was still on her. In addition to photos with her boyfriend in the album, there was indeed a close-up photo of Jessica's back. Could it be that she had actually been with a werewolf? But why had Jessica forgotten all about this? Just then, the nun came over, lifted the cloth, and interrupted Jessica's thoughts. The nun didn't take her phone away. After all, there was no signal here anyway. The two went to the same room as the day before. The nun even untied the rope around Jessica's hands, explaining, "We need to draw out the monster inside you. I can't stop until it's gone."
Jesus Christ. Don't you ever.
The nun opened a cabinet in the corner, took out a sweater, and placed it on the table. She then explained, "Next, I will open the connection between you and the beast. By provoking your emotions, we will force the beast to appear." The nun told Jessica, "I've looked into you. You're 22 years old, currently homeless, staying on a friend's couch. That friend is named Kate, also 22, and she was your classmate in high school. Kate has a boyfriend named Matthew, and you often hang out with them." Jessica detected the judgment in her tone, and as expected, her emotions flared up. "You've only scratched the surface of my life. Who do you think you are to act like you know me so?" Well, as soon as she finished speaking, a burning sensation swept over her body. The nun said, "This is just the beginning. When the virus spreads further, you will also have many memories that don't belong to you." Jessica ignored the nun's words, and asked, "How is Kate doing now? Did you hurt her?" The nun didn't answer directly. Instead, she pushed the sweater toward Jessica. Jessica lunged forward to smell it almost instinctively. She caught Kate's scent on the fabric. Memories then flooded into her mind. She saw Kate and Matthew arguing while sitting on a couch. A frantic knock came from outside the door. Kate stood up to open it, only to see the nun rush in with monks. They started beating Kate and Matthew violently. The nun even lifted her leg and kicked Kate hard in the head. Before Jessica could recover from the shock, the nun dragged her into another room. Dozens of corpses were piled up inside. In the nun's words, these people had been purified, and their souls had been granted permission to serve God. Jessica spotted Kate and Matthew among the bodies. Iron nails were still embedded in their palms. It was obvious they had endured inhuman torture before death. Jessica let out a painful whimper, and was led back by the nun to the room with the table. There were only 2 days left until the next full moon. Anyone infected by then would undergo a complete transformation from the inside out. The beast would devour the infected person's soul, so the nun planned to speed up the purification process. She placed an iron all-in wolfsbane on the table, then held Jessica's hand down, and sprinkled a handful of wolfsbane on it.
I bring the Lord unto thee.
The intense pain made Jessica jump up instantly, but the nun raised the iron awl and stabbed it down again. After finishing that day's purification, Marcus escorted Jessica back to the cell as usual, locking her back in the cramped cage. The cloth blocked all her view. Frustrated, Jessica pulled out her phone. There wasn't a single bar of signal. She crushed the phone with one hand. What's more, the place where her palm had been pierced was already healed. It seemed the nun had not been lying. Jessica had indeed contracted the werewolf virus. She leaned against the cage and slowly fell asleep, feeling as if her whole body was floating in another dimension. A strange voice woke her up. Jessica opened her eyes, and saw the woman locked in the next cage. The woman explained, "This is the spiritual realm. The werewolf virus has created a connection between us, allowing us to communicate through our minds." Winnie had been locked up earlier than Jessica, and had gone through several rounds of the treatment. She urged Jessica, "You have to hold on no matter what." Immediately after, footsteps could be heard not far away. Afraid of being caught, Winnie quickly left the spiritual realm to figure out how she had contracted the virus. Jessica began to recall what had happened before her abduction. She remembered that night at the bar. She had met a man named Thomas with whom she got along well. Besides him, there were also a few middle-aged men drinking, so Jessica had to end her conversation with Thomas, carrying beers over to attend to the middle-aged men. One of them, a bearded man, pulled Jessica onto his lap, touching her inappropriately with malicious intent. Thomas hurried over to help, but was punched as soon as he stepped forward. Jessica quickly pulled the bearded man away, warning him, "Get out of the bar right now, or I'll call the police." The bearded man didn't want to make a scene, so he had to leave with his companions. Later, when the bar closed, the bearded man and his group were still waiting outside. Fortunately, Thomas hadn't left. He told Jessica to get in his car. The two escaped and left the pursuers far behind. After driving for a while, the car suddenly stopped. Thomas apologized with a guilty look on his face. Jessica was confused and asked, "Why are you apologizing when you just saved me?" As soon as she finished speaking, someone from the back seat reached out and covered Jessica's mouth and nose, holding on until she stopped struggling. Jessica stared at the scenes in her memory, unable to figure out what had happened. Her consciousness returned and she regained her senses. A man lifted the cloth covering the cage. Jessica recognized Thomas's face, but couldn't understand why he was wearing a monk's robe. So that chance encounter that night had just been a trap. Its only purpose was to capture Jessica to lock her in this cell. Thomas let Jessica out of the iron cage, and even prepared some food for her. Come to think of it, Jessica hadn't eaten anything in a long time, because being well fed would make her stronger, making it harder to control the monster inside her. That's why the nun intentionally kept the infected people in a weakened state. Thomas apologized for deceiving Jessica, but he claimed that everything they had talked about at the bar that night was true, and on this point, Thomas wasn't lying. He really had an alcoholic father and came from a poor family, and his girlfriend had been humiliated and killed. Thanks to the priest's help, Thomas had finally found his purpose in life. Jessica was tricked by him again into drinking the water Thomas handed her. There was something added to the water, and she immediately felt dizzy. Thomas took the chance to hold up the weak Jessica. Unexpectedly, they ran into Matt in the corridor. Matt was Jessica's ex-boyfriend. As soon as he saw her, he shouted, "Run!" But before the two could get close to each other, Thomas dragged Jessica away, and Marcus even grabbed Matt's head and slammed it against the wall, knocking Matt unconscious on the spot. Jessica was taken to that familiar room. Her hearing had become unusually sharp. Even the sound of water droplets falling seemed extremely loud. The nun noticed this right away, and pointed out, "Sharper hearing means your condition is worsening, so today's treatment will need to be more intensive." Jessica didn't wait for the nun to act. She lunged forward and grabbed the nun by the neck. The werewolf virus inside her took effect, allowing Jessica to lift the nun off the ground with just one hand. Thomas hurried over to stop her, holding her in his arms to calm her down, and warning her, "Don't let the beast consume your reason." The nun's purification rituals are all for your own good.
And if you work with us, there's a chance.
Jessica fell into Thomas's tender trap, gritting her teeth to endure all kinds of torture from the nun. Her skin was cut open with a dagger, and a small pool of blood formed on the ground. Jessica let out continuous cries of pain. Seeing her in such agony, Thomas couldn't help but feel compassion, but he firmly believed the priest was a kind man, and was unwilling to question whether the purification ritual was justified. After the ritual, Thomas took Jessica down to rest. This time, he didn't lock her in the cage, he even stayed by her side. To comfort her thoughtfully, Jessica didn't want to lose this feeling of warmth, so she propped herself up and leaned in to kiss him. Unexpectedly, Thomas fled in a fluster. Shortly after, Jessica was pulled into the spiritual realm by Winnie. Strangely enough, Matt was also able to join them. This could only mean that the werewolf virus in Jessica's body had been transmitted to her by Matt. Furthermore, he must have cheated on her to contract such a virus. Jessica was filled with anger. Winnie quickly changed the subject. Right now, how we got infected no longer matters. What matters is that we have to escape. If this so-called purification doesn't work before the full moon, the nun and her group will kill us to eliminate the threat once and for all. The fact that Thomas didn't lock Jessica in the iron cage tonight is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As soon as she finished speaking, a strange sound echoed in the spiritual realm. Winnie, who had been here the longest, explained, "This is a sign that a werewolf is about to turn a new member, and this time, the target he's set his sights on is actually a fat priest." Fortunately, the nun arrived with monks just in time, but this werewolf was highly skilled in combat. He quickly overpowered a monk and grabbed him by the neck, but the werewolf forgot there was someone not to be messed with behind him. The nun picked up a pistol and shot the werewolf through the head. Immediately after, Jessica woke up from the spiritual realm. The wound on her back had already healed, and she was no longer as weak as before. Jessica took advantage of the empty surroundings to look for an exit. Suddenly, footsteps could be heard approaching. She quickly hid in the interrogation room. A figure flashed past outside. Based on the robes, it must have been the priest. Jessica caught a glimpse of a stack of documents on the table, and was about to check for clues, when the nun suddenly returned, looking furious. Jessica hid under the table. The nun left the fat priest, who had nearly been infected with the virus, here, and then left the room with the monks. She was following orders to burn the werewolf's corpse. As for the fat priest, he wasn't surprised when he found Jessica. He must have heard her name from the werewolf. From their conversation, it was learned that if a werewolf suffered enough trauma, they could trigger the transformation even when it wasn't a full moon. While they were talking, the priest returned. Jessica hid under the table again, yet the fat priest wasn't afraid of the red-collared priest, for the latter was his father. It was just that the fat priest seemed to be around the same age as his father. The red-collared priest couldn't understand his son's choice. Why throw away a good reputation to mess around with werewolves?
Because you are wrong. Holy water didn't burn his skin any more than it does yours. He was not evil.
Upon hearing this, the red-collared priest hugged his son, then shot him in a vital area. After that, he composed himself and left the interrogation room. Jessica quickly slipped out to find a way to escape. She hadn't gone far when she saw Thomas escorting Matt, and constantly urging Matt to repent in front of the altar and receive purification from the Heavenly Father. Matt could tell that Thomas still had a shred of conscience left. He asked rhetorically, "You've been doing this job for so long. Have you ever successfully saved a single infected person? You're just torturing and killing innocent people. Don't keep making this mistake." But before he could finish speaking, the priest rushed over. He ignored Thomas's attempts to stop him, lunging forward to violently beat Matt, obviously venting the anger he had bottled up over his son. Matt, who was already on the verge of death, couldn't withstand such brutal torture. In his final moments, he specifically apologized to Jessica through the spiritual realm, and wished her success in escaping this cage. Matt was beaten to death by the priest just like that. The red-collared priest gave an order to the other two infected people, "Give them one last chance, otherwise, I will personally get rid of these hybrids." Upon hearing this, Jessica had to go back to the cage temporarily, to prevent the priest from discovering her escape, which would have led to more serious consequences. Thomas was still shaken by the priest's actions. He came over to kindly warn Jessica, "You must dedicate yourself entirely to God later."
I understand.
Jessica kicked Thomas twice, knocking him unconscious. Then she set out to find an exit from this dreadful place. As for the nun, she was busy torturing Winnie. What she called purification was actually just using private punishment. Just as Winnie was about to be choked to death, Jessica rushed in just in time to stop her. Winnie also hurried over to help. landing a few punches that made the nun's nose bleed. Jessica pulled away the curly-haired woman, who had been driven to a murderous rage. The top priority now was to escape quickly. By a stroke of luck, the two stumbled upon the back door, but Thomas soon caught up and fired a shot into the air.
Do not make me do this!
Thomas had been persuaded by the red-collared priest, firmly believing that keeping Jessica here for treatment was the right choice. Jessica simply told him, "Your beloved priest killed his own son with his own hands." Thomas refused to believe her. In a fit of anger, he shot at Jessica, then turned his gun on Winnie. Winnie knew she couldn't escape this fate. Immediately entered the spiritual realm, urging Jessica to act and transform quickly. As soon as she finished speaking, Thomas pulled the trigger, a shot that blew Winnie's head off. There was absolutely no chance of survival. The fat priest had said earlier that, when trauma accumulated to a certain level, even a crescent moon could trigger the transformation. That shot hit Jessica in the abdomen. It wasn't fatal, but it inadvertently helped her complete the transformation. Jessica chased after Thomas, following his scent. Unexpectedly, she ran into the nun. The woman picked up a dagger from the ground and charged at her, but she was no match for a werewolf. Jessica pounced on the nun and feasted on her. The red-collared priest actually launched a sneak attack from behind. Jessica took several punches from him, but before the priest could deliver a fatal blow, she scratched his neck with one claw. The priest fled in a hurry. At this moment, the clouds covering the moon dispersed. Jessica's bones swelled rapidly. The priest hurried to call for help, but unfortunately, it was already too late. Jessica had completely transformed into a werewolf. The red-collared priest was truly naive. Even at a time like this, he was still preaching. The priest clearly realized he was no match for the werewolf, so he picked up his pistol, ready to end his own life. But Jessica didn't give him that chance. Instead, she stepped forward and killed the priest with her own hands. She gouged out his eyes to avenge her companions, then chased after the monk and dismembered him into pieces. Now, only Thomas was left alive, the very person who had tricked her here with lies, and helped the red-collared priest harm so many innocent people. Simply killing him with her hands wouldn't ease the hatred in her heart. Jessica wanted him to taste the agony of suffering. It should be known that werewolves can, through blood, traverse the memories of their prey. When she killed the red-collared priest by biting him, she discovered Thomas's fiancée hadn't been killed by hooligans at all. She had died from the red-collared priest's sexual assault. It never occurred to her that the red-collared priest had just made up a story casually, yet Thomas had willingly become a subordinate to the man who killed his wife. This truth was more cruel than killing Thomas himself. Jessica vanished into the night in the blink of an eye. Even though it had only been a few short hours, she had already fallen in love with this feeling of freedom. The movie ends here. It's a low-budget, small-scale B-movie, most likely due to the low budget. The monster only appeared in the last half hour. Additionally, the amount of gore and the level of eccentricity are quite mediocre, and the dialogue scenes also have a vibe of online feature films. If you want to make a wonderful monster movie with a low budget, you need to excel in at least one of two aspects, gore or plot. This one clearly falls short in both.